Mr. Dick, that was beautiful.
Amen.
We're not very comfortable being still. We're not very comfortable being quiet. And just to help you understand how uncomfortable we are, I want to ask you to be as quiet as we can be and as still as we can be for 1 minute. Now I realize Katie may not want to be still, so she doesn't, and she doesn't want to be quiet. That's okay. For the rest of us, just for 1 minute, I'm going to start the timer right now. Okay? Seemed like forever, didn't it?
I could be quiet, I was not still.
Me neither.
I turned my head, I didn't even mean to.
We are activity oriented. We think we've got to be doing something all the time. Few of us ever spend any quiet time. We're uncomfortable with silence. We always think we have to say something, don't we? We always think we have to give words of encouragement to people. When I was in seminary, I had a class with Dr. John Olin Strange. Dr. Strange's wife died with cancer. When she was in the hospital at the point of death, he talked to us about a day in the hospital. That was a very special day to him. There were only 2 students in that class. Joe Glaze and I took the class. It was an exegesis of Isaiah in Hebrew, from Hebrew to English. Not too many people wanted to do that. Pretty tough class. But it allowed us to have a lot of great time with Dr. Strange. And that morning was one of those great times when he talked about that ministry of silence. He said that 2 of the professors from the seminary came to visit him and his wife in the hospital. And he said when they came in, they never said a word. Each of them came over and hugged him. Each of them stood on each side of him. And after a few minutes of complete silence, they left and never spoke. He talked about the beauty of a ministry of silence. We always think we have to have words to say, and we don't. We often say, I don't know what to say. That's okay. That is okay. That is not an admission of some kind of failure on your part. It is okay not to say anything. Sometimes it's just enough to be there, to be present, to give a hug, to hold a hand. Whatever it is that you do, that's enough. I've often thought about having a service in church when we come in and sit down and nobody says anything until they feel God moving them. I'd really like to try that sometimes, to see how that works, to see what you might have to say, to listen to you as you feel God speaking to you. Just sit there quietly and listen to God. I loved an interview I saw once with a news reporter and Mother Teresa. The news reporter was trying to get some big theological things out of Mother Teresa. And so she said to her, she asked her the question, said, what does God say to you when you talk to him? And Mother Teresa said, he doesn't say anything, he listens. And so the news reporter was kind of taken aback, and she said, well, what do you say to God? She said, I say nothing. I listen. I listen. How long since you listened to God? When I was a teenager, I spent a lot of time in the woods. I loved to go walking in the woods. In the summertime, I didn't have a job. I'd wear a pair of short pants, and I was barefooted and didn't have a shirt on, and I was as close to nature as I could be. And I would just go out in the woods, and there was a particular place on my dad's place that had a lot of huge pine trees. And the ground was just coated with pine straw about that deep. I would go and lay under the pine trees on that pine straw, and I would listen to God. I have very little doubt that that's the reason that I'm a minister today, because I listened. Because God was speaking to me, and I listened. On a mission trip one time, we had a different kind of mission trip than we'd ever had at the church I was in. Most of the time we had activities from the morning till the afternoon, and in the evenings even we'd have church services. We'd start out with backyard Bible clubs or vacation Bible school in the morning. We'd work on the building in the afternoon, painting or refinishing pews or doing something like that. In the evening time, we'd have revival services. And it was always such a full week when we had a mission trip. But this one particular trip, all we did was just have backyard Bible clubs in the morning. And then in the afternoon, we had the whole afternoon free. About the third day of that trip, one of the young girls named Debbie Cox came and sat down and told me, she said, I don't like this mission trip. And I said, why, Debbie? What don't you like about it? And she said, I don't like spending so much time with me. She didn't like having to spend some time thinking. Kind of the proverbial running from ourselves. We run from ourselves, don't we? Because we don't want to spend time. We don't want to look at the reality of things. We don't want to see things as we are. And we don't want to be still. I want to read from Psalm 46, 1 through 11. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in time of trouble. Therefore we will not fear. Now listen what he says. Follow what we fear. We will not fear, although the earth should change, though the mountains shake to the heart of the sea, though the waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble with its tumult. To put it in our vernacular today, we would say until all hell breaks loose. That's the way we talk about it. Till all hell breaks loose in our lives. When everything goes wrong. When nothing is going according to the way that it ought to go in our lives, in nature. And this is The psalmist's way of talking about the tumult that we have in our lives. And my goodness, how much have we had in our church lately? How much have we had in our individual lives? And it seems like we just can't stand anymore. I've had all I can stand. I don't think God can put anything else on me because I think I'll break under the pressure. And how much and how often have you thought about that in recent months? When you thought you would give in to all the things that are pressing from the outside. There's a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy habitation of the Most High. God is in the midst of the city. It shall not be moved. God will help it when the morning dawns. The nations are in an uproar. The kingdoms totter. He utters his voice. The earth melts. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. Come, behold the works of the Lord. See what desolations he has brought on the earth. He makes war cease to end. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He burns the shields with fire. Then he says, be still and know that I am God. I am exalted among the nations. I am exalted in the earth. The Lord of hosts is with me. The God of Jacob is our refuge. Be still and know that I am God. The Hebrew word translated be still is the word raha. It means to slacken or to sit down, let down, or to cease, to stop. And the picture is, in the midst of the war that he's talking about here, that the two sides come to the point of laying down the bows, the weapons of war. They lay them down and they stop what they're doing. It can also mean to drop or to be weak or to faint. And I think more than talking about just sitting here not moving, not even batting your eye, being still in that way, it's talking about coming to the point of having a calm in your life. You stop. You become weak. You realize that you've done everything you can. Life is not based on activity. Our Christian life is not based on activity. Activity doesn't mean anything. You know what the most active critter in the barnyard is? A chicken with its head cut off. And what does it accomplish? Nothing at all. But that's the way we are. We keep running. We keep running. We keep on being active. Even when we have lost our axe head, like happened in the Old Testament. We keep banging in the forest with our empty axes. Just keep going, because we don't want to stop. We run from ourselves, and what we need to do is we need to stop and we become weak. And that sounds foolish, doesn't it? That we stop and become weak. But I want to suggest to you this morning that God is not looking for human beings who are strong enough to use. God is looking for human beings who are weak enough to use. They come to the point of realizing I can't do any more by myself and I need to be still. Calm, not from the lack of trouble, but because of the way God has always intervened when we have trouble. Be still and know that I am God. It is at that time that we come to the point of realizing who God is and realize that God has always, always, always been with his people. He does not desert us. He does not leave us on our own. Be still. In the New Testament, there's also a passage where it talks about being still. In Mark chapter 4, verses 35 and following. On that day when evening had come, he said to them, "Let us go across to the other side." And leaving the crowd behind, they took him with them in the boat, just as he was. Other little boats were with him. A great windstorm arose, and the waves came into the boat, so that the boat was already being swamped. But he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. And they woke him up and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" He woke up and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." Be still. Even Jesus wanted still in the midst of the storm. He was tired. He had been teaching. He got in the boat with the disciples and started across to the other side. And what did he do? He said, "I'll go take a little nap." I'll go take a little nap. Because you see, he was comfortable. He wasn't afraid of the storm. It was the disciples who were afraid of the storm. And even though they were in the presence of the Master, they still were afraid, and so they woke him up. And I think he must have been a little frustrated. You had to be awakened from a real deep sleep. Yesterday afternoon, I was taking myself a pretty good nap, and one of those robocallers called. I want to tell you, I wasn't a happy camper. I don't think Jesus was a happy camper on this day, because he wanted calm. And so he said, "Be still." Can also be translated to say hush or shut up in today's vernacular. You ever come to the point with your children that you want to just tell them, "Be still and shut up"? Or my dad would say, "Sit down and shut up." But he meant be still. In the storms of our lives, we need calm. We need calm. You ever been on a trip with your kids and they ask you 14,000 times, "Are we there yet? Are we there yet?" And you just wanted to turn around and ask them to be quiet. Be still. The New Testament also talks about it in another place in a different way. In Romans chapter 12, verse 3, it says that we need to be transformed. How do we need to be transformed? By the renewing of our mind. We need to refresh our minds, to turn our minds upon God. It's not enough just to be calm, but it is that we need to renew our minds, thinking about the things of God and realizing how much God is in control and how God has always been in control. And he always will be. We don't have to be in control because God is. We always keep wanting to do a little bit more. We always want to do a little bit more. We want to make sure that we get everything done ourselves. And we work hard at it, don't we? To the point that we almost do false things in our lives because we're trying to do more and more. I run across this week, and I want to read it to you. Here is the irony of this term, "be still." While we must take the initiative to fulfill our responsibility and live our lives, the uncertainties of living in a world of sin and woe will continually challenge us. Personal initiative is no substitute for reliance upon God. Did you hear that? Personal initiative is no substitute for reliance upon God. We try to do too much. We try to take over the situation. We try to control the situation. And the truth is that we can't do it. So what we need to learn to do is to be still, to let go, to renew our minds, to surrender, to shut out the thoughts that do not serve us in our lives. Be still and know that I am God. In 1 Kings chapter 19, verses 11 and 12, Elijah had just won a great victory over the prophets of Baal. You remember that? How he called the water down, water down upon the fire, and then the fire burned up the wet wood, and he won the big victory over the prophets of Baal. It's one of the high moments of his life. But immediately following that, in these two verses, he went out to the mountain, and he was alone and afraid because Jezebel had threatened him, had threatened his life. And so here sat Elijah out there on the mountain, running from this woman, Queen Jezebel. There he was, feeling sorry for himself. And he said, am I the only one who serves God? God asked him a question, why are you here, Elijah? And he said, am I the only one who serves God? Felt like he was all by himself. How often have you felt alone? How often in the last few months and all the things that our church has gone through have you felt alone? Feeling sorry for yourself. Even though you've won some major victories, and even though you've seen God working in great and mighty ways, we forget to think about God. Be still and know. Know that I am God. And so Elijah had this experience. The wind came. And the wind was so great that it was breaking up the rocks. It was a horrible wind. But Elijah didn't hear from God. Then the earthquake. He must have been afraid as the earth rattled. I don't know if you've ever felt an earthquake or not. I've just felt one in my life that I could feel the tremors just a little bit. But the earthquakes, and you've seen pictures of earthquakes. You remember the one in San Francisco a few years ago when bridges fell and buildings fell because the earthquake so violently. But Elijah didn't hear from God. Then the fire came. You read about the fires or watched the fires on the news in the last few weeks? Terrible, aren't they? People are just being killed. We saw about a woman and her two kids who were left at home by the husband, and he came back and the fire had shifted and all of a sudden burned their house, and his wife and two grandchildren were killed. Sad because the fire came. The fire was great, but Elijah didn't see God in the fire. But as he sat there in the cave, there was suddenly a still, small voice. A still, small voice. You know what I think it was? I think it was the Spirit of God. It was a hushed whisper when God spoke within. In the New Testament, it speaks about God's Spirit bearing witness to our spirit. Haven't you known those times when God's Spirit spoke to your spirit? You didn't hear any audible voice. You didn't see any fire. You didn't feel an earthquake. You didn't notice the wind. It was just the quiet presence of God speaking within you, talking to you, comforting you, challenging you, encouraging you, whatever it was that he did. I think all of us as Christians, if we have but listened, like Mother Teresa, we've heard that still small voice speak to us inside. It may be in the midst of your battle with cancer. It may be in the loss of a job. It may be in the loss of a loved one. It may be when you're going through sickness and having to take care of somebody that you love. It may be in any different number of ways in your life. But if you are but still and calm and listening, you'll hear that still small voice speak to you. Dr. Earl Gwynn was a professor of preaching at Louisiana College. Came and did a revival in our church when I was pastor in Haynesville, Louisiana. Dr. Gwynn was old and feeble, and honestly, there were times I didn't know if he'd be able to make it to the pulpit. But I want to tell you, that man could preach. That man could preach. Wasn't loud, wasn't boisterous, quiet, not assuming, just the facts about God. And he spoke about this experience that I'm talking about. And he said, it's when deep speaks to deep. I've never forgotten that expression. When deep speaks to deep. When God touches us at the very heart of our being. You see, in our active, hustle and bustle world, we get so wrapped up in hurrying and trying to do things on our own and trying to make sure we've done our part. We keep running after ourselves and we forget to stop. And you don't have to stop physically to stop spiritually and listen. It can be in the midst of the busiest day that you have, that right in the midst of that day, all of a sudden you're still, in the sense of letting go, in the sense of becoming weak, in the sense of letting the spiritual take over in your life and listening to the voice of God. That still small voice that speaks deep within and says, we've got this. I've got this. That's the way we say it today, isn't it? That's what God would say to us if he was with you today. Whatever it is you're going through, however isolated you feel, however difficult life may be, however afraid you are, God is right there in the midst of it all. And he's saying, I've got this. Father, thank you for allowing us time to be still. Help us to listen as you speak to our need. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.